Oh my God. Wow.
Picture this, it's Christmas Eve, the room is glowing with lights, and my sister opens a box holding a $60,000 diamond bracelet. The whole family gasps, applauds like she's the star of the night. Then it's my turn. I peel back the paper and find a $15 candle, and the laughter that followed, it burned worse than the wick ever could. Hi, I'm Hannah, the daughter who's always been pushed to the sidelines, the one told to be grateful for scraps while others got the spotlight. But that night, something inside me snapped. What they didn't know is I had proof and I was ready to use it. So let me ask you, how would you feel if your family made that kind of choice in front of everyone? Would you stay quiet or would you finally stand up? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your take. I still remember that Christmas Eve. Vanessa lifted a $60,000 bracelet from her box, while I was left staring at a $15 candle in my lap. The living room sparkled with holiday polish. A tall tree draped in white lights, ornaments glittering against the branches, relatives packed into couches with wine glasses in hand. To anyone outside the window, the Collins family looked like the picture of suburban perfection. But inside my chest, something cracked. It wasn't the first time gifts had drawn a line between us. Birthdays, graduations, even ordinary weekends, Vanessa's packages were bigger, shinier, heavier with value. Mine were afterthoughts, the kind you grabbed from a shelf on the way home. But this time, under the bright glow of Christmas Eve, the difference felt impossible to swallow. Mom leaned forward, eyes glowing as Vanessa held her wrist to the light. "Sweetheart, it looks stunning on you," she whispered, her voice trembling with pride. Dad raised his glass high, grinning at the applause from Uncle Donald and Aunt Elaine. Vanessa basked in the attention, laughing as the diamonds scattered flecks of light across the ceiling. She was the star and the stage had been set for her alone. Then it was my turn. Mom reached for a small red bag, its paper wrinkled, ribbon taped unevenly at the top. She placed it on my lap without ceremony, already turning her eyes back to Vanessa. I peeled the paper slowly, forcing a smile to keep my hands from shaking. Inside was a vanilla candle, the kind you could find in a clearance aisle, its price tag still clinging to the bottom. $15. I lifted it to my nose, pretended to savor the scent, and looked up at the room. Dad chuckled first. "Well, at least Hannah loves candles," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter that followed was polite, casual, but it landed like a stone in my chest. The chuckles swelled for a moment, then faded as the spotlight swung back to Vanessa and her diamond-studded wrist. Mom didn't even glance at me. Her gaze stayed fixed on the bracelet, her voice rising with pride as she stroked Vanessa's hand. The message was clear. My gift didn't matter, my presence didn't matter. For years I had swallowed the sting of favoritism, but tonight the weight of it pressed so heavy I could hardly breathe. Michael leaned closer, smirk tugging at his mouth. "Don't look so serious, it's just a candle," he whispered. His words cut sharper than the laughter. My jaw tightened. I turned to him, my voice low, controlled, meant only for his ears. "Not this time," I said. He laughed, thinking I was bluffing, but the words burned steady inside me. To him it was nothing, another throwaway remark in a holiday evening. To me it was the start of something larger, a line I knew I would never step back across. The chatter returned to Vanessa, her wrist lifted high, diamonds catching the light as relatives leaned in for another look. I placed the candle on the side table beside me, its wick smooth and untouched. To them it was cheap, forgettable. To me it was the last straw, the proof I needed to stop pretending. Later that night, as relatives bundled their coats and the door closed behind the last car, I caught sight of Mom sliding receipts into her purse. One slip of paper peeked out, $60,000 printed at the top. Proof carelessly tucked away, confirming what everyone knew but no one said aloud. A bracelet worth $60,000 for Vanessa. A candle worth $15 for me. That piece of paper planted something inside me. The gifts weren't just tokens of love anymore, they were evidence. Evidence I would carry, build upon, and one day lay on the table in front of all of them. The next morning, laughter from last night still rang in my ears. It clung to me like smoke, following me down the stairs as if the whole house were built to echo it back. Every chuckle, every sigh of admiration for Vanessa's bracelet replayed in my mind, louder than the Christmas carols that still hummed softly from the radio in the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared at the pile of dirty dishes stacked in the sink. Half-eaten rolls, lipstick stains on wine glasses, forks still crusted with mashed potatoes, evidence of a party that had left me feeling smaller than the crumbs on the table. I tried to focus on the present, but my thoughts drifted back. It wasn't just about last night. Birthdays when my gifts came in plastic bags while Michael's came with keys attached. Graduations where I got a book and Vanessa got a necklace. I'd been pushed aside in plain sight, and the pattern stretched back further than I wanted to admit. The kitchen door creaked and I froze. Voices carried down the hall, Sophie's light tone and Anna Lane's sharper one. They hadn't noticed me yet, tucked behind the doorway with my coffee mug in hand. I leaned closer, careful not to let the floor creak. "Gregory will leave everything to Michael," Anna Lane said. Her words were casual, like she was commenting on the weather, but they landed heavy. "It's only right, the company, the house. Hannah will be fine. Girls like her don't need much." Sophie's voice lowered. "Are you sure? That seems unfair." Elaine laughed softly. "Unfair, that's how families keep their legacy. Michael's the heir, always has been." My stomach tightened. I pressed my back to the wall, holding my breath, heart hammering as if they might hear it. The truth wasn't whispered in shadows, it was spoken openly, as if my future had been written without me. When their footsteps faded, I stepped into the kitchen, my pulse still racing. Sophie was by the counter, avoiding my eyes. She'd heard me enter, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but instead she shook her head, sliding past me toward the hallway. I caught the flicker of guilt in her expression. She knew I'd heard, she knew I wasn't supposed to. Left alone, I stared at the cluttered table. My eyes drifted to Mom's purse, slouched against the chair where she had dropped it last night. Something inside urged me forward. I pulled it closer, fingers careful, cautious, as if I were defusing a bomb. The zipper slid open, and there it was. A folded receipt, white paper with black print bold across the top. I smoothed it flat against the table. The numbers stared back at me, $60,000, the exact cost of Vanessa's bracelet. Line by line, the details were clear. Jewelry store date, Mom's signature at the bottom. The memory of Vanessa sliding it on her wrist replayed in my mind, only now it came with proof. It wasn't just favoritism. It was calculated, undeniable, written in ink. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hand shook as I held the receipt, coffee cooling in the mug beside me. My chest hurt, but beneath the ache, something else stirred, resolve. The laughter, the bracelet, the candle, every little slight, they weren't just accidents or thoughtless mistakes. They were evidence, and this scrap of paper was the first piece of the puzzle I had been too afraid to put together. The sound of footsteps upstairs jolted me. I slid the receipt back into the purse, careful to leave it folded exactly as I had found it. I didn't want them to know I had it yet, not until I was ready. But as I pushed the chair back and straightened up, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. My face looked different, harder, determined. The candle from last night still sat on the counter, wick unlit. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, felt the cheap sticker against my palm. To anyone else, it was worth almost nothing. But now, paired with the receipt, it became something else entirely, a starting point. I whispered to the empty kitchen, my voice steady for the first time in years. "If they think I'm blind, they are wrong." I held the receipt in my hand long after slipping it from Mom's purse, staring at the bold numbers as if they could erase all doubt. $60,000. Not just a bracelet, but a declaration. It wasn't the first time money had been used as proof of love in this family. I carried the receipt upstairs, folded carefully in my pocket, and sat on the edge of my bed. The candle from last night rested on my nightstand, still unlit, its presence mocking me with its cheap weight. I opened the drawer of my desk, pulling out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were tuition statements, letters from the university, reminders of late fees and payment plans. I remembered the way Dad sighed over every bill, the way Mom muttered about how college is expensive for everyone. I remembered how I'd picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, stayed up nights balancing homework with a part-time job. I had begged for help, and every time, the answer was the same: we're doing what we can. But when Michael got married, the story changed. I remembered the reception like it was yesterday. Lights strung across a vineyard, crystal glasses on every table, a honeymoon trip spoken of with pride. $30,000 covered without hesitation. Dad raised his glass and told the room, "Nothing is too much for my son's future." My heart had burned even then, but I swallowed it. Told myself not to ruin the celebration. Now, years later, the receipt in my hand turned that memory sourer than ever. I spread the papers across my bed. Tuition statements, credit card slips, bank loan documents still stamped with my name. Next to them, I placed the mental picture of Michael's honeymoon invoice, a cost they'd carried proudly as if spending for him was proof of their legacy. The contrast was undeniable. For me, debt and excuses. For him, open wallets and applause. The patterns were all there, stretching back through every milestone. Vanessa's car at 16, Michael's college fund, Mom's proud shopping trips with bags full of gifts. My milestones came with lectures about independence, warnings not to expect too much, reminders that life isn't fair. I had believed them once. I had convinced myself it was just circumstance. But with each page spread before me, each faded piece of paper, the truth sharpened. This was never about circumstance. It was choice. I leaned back against the headboard, the ceiling light casting sharp shadows across the papers. My chest ached with a mixture of grief and anger. Yet beneath it, resolve tightened like a knot I couldn't untie. I would not let history repeat itself. They could laugh at candles, boast about bracelets, cover honeymoons and houses, but I was done playing the role of the overlooked daughter. I whispered it aloud, my voice steady, each word anchoring itself into the silence of my room. I won't let this happen again. The vibration of my phone startled me. The screen lit up with Sophie's name. My heart skipped. After what she had overheard in the kitchen, I knew she carried truths the others didn't want me to know. I pressed the phone to my palm, feeling the weight of choice before I even answered. The receipt on my nightstand fluttered slightly in the draft from the heater, as though reminding me it was waiting. Proof had begun to stack, and now the pieces were leading me toward something larger, something I had ignored too long. I picked up the phone, pulse quickening. Sophie's message was short: "We need to talk." I met Sophie at a cafe downtown, the kind of place that smelled like burnt espresso and sugar-coated muffins. The green Starbucks sign glowed against the gray December sky, and inside the line curled past the pastry case. I found her already seated near the window, her hands wrapped around a paper cup as though she needed the warmth for courage. When she saw me, her shoulders shifted, like she wasn't sure if she should wave or hide. I slid into the seat across from her, setting my own coffee down, the steam fogging the edge of my glasses. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I thought about the receipt still tucked away in my drawer at home. It had been my first proof, a starting point, but I knew instinctively it wouldn't be enough. The imbalance wasn't just about bracelets and candles. Something larger was brewing beneath the surface. "You heard them," Sophie said finally, her voice barely above the hum of the cafe. "Aunt Elaine, Dad, they talk like it's already decided." My stomach nodded. "About Michael?" She nodded. "About everything, the house, the company, the trust. Gregory, your dad, he told Elaine not to worry, that he'd make sure the will was adjusted. He called it fixing the future." The words sank into me like ice. Adjusted. Fixed. My father making promises behind closed doors, not just playing favorites with gifts, but rewriting my place in the family altogether. I gripped my coffee cup harder, the cardboard sleeve crinkling in my palm. "I thought you should know," Sophie added quickly. Her eyes darted toward the crowded line, then back to me. "And there's something else." She pulled out her phone, scrolling with hurried fingers. I managed to capture part of an email he sent. I shouldn't have seen it, but he left his laptop open during the reunion dinner. I took a picture. She turned the phone around. The screen glowed with a blurry photo of a laptop screen, but the words were clear enough. "Michael will take majority control once adjustments are finalized. Hannah doesn't need much, she has her own path. I'll keep the details discreet." My breath caught. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't gossip. It was my father's own words. I stared at the email, heart pounding. Each sentence was another stone added to the wall they were building to push me out. The receipts had shown favoritism in spending, but this was evidence of intent. Deliberate, planned, written proof of what I had felt in my bones all along. I looked up at Sophie, her face pale, eyes wide with fear that she'd done something wrong. But all I felt was a surge of relief twisted with anger. "Do you still have it?" I asked. She nodded. "I sent it to myself before deleting the picture from his laptop. I'll forward it to you, just be careful if they find out I helped." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "Thank you," I whispered. The words carried more weight than I expected. Sophie had handed me a weapon when they couldn't laugh away with jokes about candles. A message pinged on my phone moments later. The subject line read, "Forwarded message, Gregory Collins." Attached was the photo of the email, clear and undeniable. I saved it instantly, twice over, backing it up to make sure it couldn't vanish. The cafe noise faded into background static as I stared at the file. My father had reduced me to a footnote, a problem to be discreetly managed. They had already tried to erase me from the future of the family. But now, with this single email, I held a piece of proof too sharp to ignore. I leaned back in my chair, pulse steadying, mind racing. If there was one email, there could be more. More messages, more evidence, more cracks in their story. They thought I was blind, too distracted, too weak to notice. But now I had the first file in my hands, and it was only the beginning. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket, the screen still buzzing faintly against my leg. Sophie looked at me, nervous, waiting for my reaction. I gave her the smallest smile, not because I was happy, but because for the first time in years I felt the scale tipping just a little. As we stood to leave, I glanced back at the cafe window. Outside, snow drifted across the street, coating the sidewalks in white. To passers-by, I probably looked like just another young woman finishing her coffee. But inside, I was something else entirely, a daughter holding her first piece of ammunition. Walking out into the cold, I whispered to myself, almost like a vow. If there's one email, what else is out there? At Easter brunch, Dad raised his glass to Michael. The dining room buzzed with chatter, but his voice cut through it, steady and commanding like it always did when he wanted everyone's attention. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth, already bracing myself for whatever was about to come. His words stung like knives. "To my son," he said, his eyes sweeping across the table, landing squarely on Michael. "The future of this family, and the one who will carry our name forward. The company will be in good hands." A wave of approval rolled across the room. Uncle Donald clapped Michael on the back, Aunt Elaine whispered something about how proud Gregory must be, and the cousins nodded as if this was all expected. I forced myself to swallow, though the bite of ham on my plate tasted like ash. Vanessa leaned in, her voice syrupy and smug. "Of course he deserves it. Who else could possibly run it?" She flicked her hair over her shoulder and let her bracelet catch the sunlight streaming in from the window, as if the diamonds themselves agreed with her. I sat quietly, clutching the strap of my bag under the table. Inside, my phone hummed with the forwarded email Sophie had given me days earlier. The words on that screen, Dad's own words about adjusting the will, burned hotter than the coffee in my cup. I didn't pull it out. Not yet. But knowing it was there gave me a strange kind of strength, like a secret shield pressed close to my chest. Relatives kept talking, voices weaving into a net meant to hold me in place. Michael, the golden son, Michael, the rightful heir. I stared down at my plate, letting the noise swirl, but in the reflection of my spoon I caught my own eyes. They weren't the same eyes that had stayed silent at Christmas. They were sharper now, harder. Dad raised his glass again, repeating his toast as if to cement it in history. "To Michael, our legacy." The room applauded. I pressed my napkin to my lips to hide the smirk tugging at the corner. It wasn't joy, it was defiance. They thought their narrative was sealed, but they had no idea how close it was to cracking. I leaned back in my chair, listening to Vanessa chatter about Michael's leadership skills, about how no one works harder than he does. I bit down on the words I wanted to say. Not yet. Timing mattered. For now, I let my smirk say what my lips didn't. I won't stay silent much longer. As the meal wound down and relatives lingered over coffee, I slipped away to the porch, the spring air cool against my skin. My hand shook slightly as I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the saved email. The words glowed against the screen, confirmation that everything they toasted was built on lies. My pulse steadied as I hit the contact list. Lucas answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. "Hannah, what's wrong?" I drew a breath, glancing back at the window where Dad was laughing. Michael at his side, Vanessa leaning in like she belonged on a throne. "I need you to believe me," I said. There was silence on the other end, heavy but alive. For the first time, I wasn't just carrying proof in my bag, I was beginning to carry it into the world. Lucas studied me across the diner table, his eyes tracing every movement, every breath I took. The neon sign above the window buzzed faintly, casting a soft red glow over the booths. It was late past 9, and the diner was nearly empty, save for a tired waitress refilling coffee cups and a man at the counter reading a newspaper. It felt like the kind of place where secrets could live safely, at least for a little while. I slid my phone across the table. The screen lit up with the forwarded email from Sophie. Lucas leaned forward, brow furrowed, reading each line in silence. His lips pressed into a tight line, his hand drumming lightly on the table as though trying to shake off the weight of the words. "This is bigger than you think," he said finally. His voice was low, steady, but filled with concern. "Hannah, this isn't just favoritism. This is about inheritance, control, legal documents. If your dad's willing to rewrite the will, he's already moving the pieces against you." I swallowed hard, fingers curling around my coffee mug. "I know, but I can't let them erase me, not again." Lucas sighed, running his hand through his hair. For a moment he looked like he might push the phone back to me, wash his hands of the whole thing. But then his eyes met mine and something shifted. He reached across the table, squeezing my hand firmly. "I'm with you," he said. The words were simple, but they landed with a force that steadied me. Relief washed through me so sharp it almost hurt. I wasn't alone anymore. For months, for years, I had carried the burden in silence, too afraid to share it, too tired of being told I was overreacting. Now someone believed me. Someone was willing to stand next to me when the storm came. I pulled a folded paper from my bag, a printed copy of the email Sophie had forwarded. I pushed it toward him. "Keep this," I said, "in case something happens. I need someone else to have it." Lucas hesitated, then slipped the paper into his jacket pocket. "All right, but if we're going to do this, you need to be careful. Your parents have money, lawyers, influence. Don't underestimate them." I nodded, though my pulse quickened at the thought. He was right, but I wasn't backing down. Not after everything I had seen, not after every holiday that carved the same scar deeper. The waitress came by, topping off our coffee. She glanced at us, probably noting the tension, but said nothing. The hum of the neon sign filled the silence that followed. For the first time in a long while, that silence felt bearable. I leaned back in the booth, watching Lucas sip his coffee, his eyes still flicking toward the paper in his pocket. It wasn't just a file now, it was shared, it was real. My chest loosened, my breath evening out. Relief, that was the only word for it. Then my phone lit up on the table, buzzing against the plastic surface. I glanced at the screen. The name glowing there made my stomach twist. Raymond Clark, our family lawyer. Lucas noticed, his eyebrows rising. "Are you going to answer?" The screen buzzed again, insistent, his name pulsing in blue. I stared at it, pulse racing. My proof had just gained an ally. Now the law itself was calling. Holiday dinner was supposed to feel festive, but when I walked into the dining room that night, my pulse was pounding too hard for me to notice the decorations. The candles flickered in the center of the long table, their glow casting shadows across polished silverware and crystal glasses. My bag hung heavy on my shoulder, the folder inside pressing against my ribs. Sophie's words from weeks ago echoed in my mind, "Make them listen." Tonight I would. Everyone was already seated when I stepped in. Michael occupied the center seat like a throne, Vanessa leaning close enough for her bracelet to sparkle under the light. Mom fluttered around the table, checking place settings as if perfection there could mask imperfection everywhere else. Dad sat at the head, posture straight, eyes sharp. The extended family filled the sides, Uncle Donald, Aunt Elaine, cousins all buzzing with small talk about promotions, vacations, new houses. Their chatter dulled as I took my place at the far end. The meal stretched on. Roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, food that smelled rich but tasted bland on my tongue. Every time I lifted my glass, I felt the folder shift against my side. My hand tightened around the stem, waiting, counting the beats of my heart. Then Dad stood. His glass-lifted high voice commanding the room into silence. To Michael, he said, each word slow, deliberate. The future of this family, the one who will take the reins, carry our name forward, and lead with strength. Applause burst around the table. Anna Lane beamed. Vanessa clapped louder than anyone, her diamonds throwing sparks into the air. Michael smiled modestly, though the pride on his face was impossible to hide. My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't only pain, it was fury. The sound of Sophie's voice came back to me, make them listen. I pushed my chair back and stood. Scrape of wood against tile cut through the applause. Every head turned. My hand slid into my bag, fingers closing around the folder. My voice trembled at first, but steadied with each word. Before we toast to the future, I said, I think we should look at the present. I pulled out the paper and dropped it onto the center of the table. The bank statement landed with a sharp slap against the polished wood, right in front of Dad's plate. The room went still. Candles flickered. The forks paused halfway to mouths. Mom frowned, confusion flitting across her face before her eyes darted to Dad. Vanessa leaned forward, her smirk faltering. Michael stiffened, his hand frozen above his glass. The extended family leaned closer, curiosity lighting their faces. This, I said, pointing at the numbers printed in black and white, is the account you used to funnel tuition money away from me while spending tens of thousands on Michael's honeymoon. My voice grew stronger, fueled by every year of being silenced. You told me there wasn't enough, but here's proof there was. A heavy silence settled. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on the table, pressing down on my chest, yet it gave me strength. For once they weren't laughing. For once they couldn't look away. Dad's face reddened. He didn't glance at the paper, not even once. His eyes locked onto mine, burning with fury. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the candles seemed to flicker more softly, as though the air itself had thickened. Explain this, Dad, I demanded. My voice was steady, louder than I intended, carrying to every corner of the room. Uncle Donald shifted uncomfortably. Anna Lane whispered something under her breath. Sophie, sitting farther down, met my gaze with the faintest nod, a flicker of approval so small no one else noticed. But Dad did not explain. His jaw tightened, his glass clinking against the table as he set it down too hard. His voice sliced through the silence like a whip. Sit down, Hannah. The command snapped across the room. Gasps rippled through the relatives. Mom reached for his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear, but he didn't look at her. His glare stayed fixed on me as though sitting down would erase the evidence, erase my voice, erase everything I had just laid bare. I didn't move, not yet. My heart pounded, my hands shook, but the statement was there, staring back at all of them. They couldn't unsee it. They couldn't unhear me. The candlelight wavered, shadows lengthening across the table. The silence was no longer polite, it was suffocating, heavy with cracks in the perfect mask they had worked so hard to keep intact. And for the first time, I felt them beginning to see me. I refused to sit back down. Dad's command still rang in the air, sharp as broken glass, but my legs stayed locked, my hands pressed firmly on the table. My chair stood pushed back behind me, a silent witness to the choice I had made. The relatives shifted nervously, silverware clinking faintly against plates no one was touching anymore. The holiday feast lay untouched, cooling, forgotten. The perfect evening had already shattered. Across the table, Sophie caught my eye. She gave the smallest nod, her chin dipping once. Lucas, seated at the far end, leaned forward, his gaze steady, willing me not to falter. Their support was quiet, almost invisible, but it was enough to steel me. My hand went back into my bag. This time it didn't tremble. I pulled out my phone, pressed the screen, and let the recording play. Dad's voice filled the room, unmistakable, echoing against the candlelit walls. I'll fix the will. Michael will take majority control. Hannah doesn't need much, she'll find her own way. The effect was immediate. Gasps rose from the sides of the table. Vanessa's fork clattered on her plate. Michael's jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed panic. Mom's face drained of color, her lips parting in a soundless protest. I let the recording finish, then stopped it. The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter had ever been. I reached into the folder and pulled out another document, a notarized copy of the will. The seal gleamed faintly under the flickering light. I laid it flat on the table, pushing it toward the center. This, I said, my voice calm but cutting, is the will your lawyer drafted. My name is right there. Equal shares, legally binding. The relatives leaned forward, eyes darting across the paper, mouths whispering in disbelief. Uncle Donald's hand trembled as he adjusted his glasses. Anna Lane whispered, "It's her name, it's really there." At that moment the front door opened. Every head turned as Raymond Clark, our family lawyer, stepped inside. He carried his briefcase in one hand, his expression unreadable. Dad stiffened, anger flashing across his face. "What are you doing here?" he barked. Clark adjusted his tie, setting his case on a side chair before approaching the table. "I was asked to verify a document," he said evenly. His eyes flicked toward me, then down to the will. He examined the seal, the signature, the notary mark. When he straightened, his voice carried finality. "It's legitimate." No one moved, no one spoke. The air thickened with the sound of truth settling in, undeniable and permanent. The evidence I had carried, the proof they had dismissed as impossible, was now stamped with the weight of law. Michael looked at Dad, his face pale. Vanessa pressed her hand to her mouth, her bracelet glittering mockingly in the candlelight. Sophie sat straighter, pride in her eyes. Lucas exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time all evening. I stood taller, feeling the shift in the room. For once, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the girl with the cheap candle. I was the daughter whose name was written in black ink, secured in law, undeniable even to those who had spent years pretending otherwise. Dad opened his mouth, closed it, then slammed his fist against the table. "This doesn't change anything," he snapped, but his voice lacked the certainty it once carried. The mask had cracked, and everyone saw through it. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. The will, the recording, and Clark's words spoke louder than I ever could. Mom's hand shook as she reached for the edge of the tablecloth. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling as though it cost her everything to speak. "What have we done?" The words hung in the air, heavier than the recording, heavier than the will itself. And in that silence, the collapse of their perfect image was complete. Silence swallowed the room after the reveal, thick and suffocating, as though even the air had forgotten how to move. The candles flickered low, casting long shadows over faces that refused to meet my eyes. Plates of untouched food sat cooling, the clink of silverware and the hum of conversation that had filled the holiday dinner now gone, replaced by a silence that was louder than any toast. For a long moment I stood still, clutching the edge of my chair. My pulse pounded in my ears, and in the quiet, years of my own silence replayed like a cruel montage. The birthdays when my presents came in plastic bags, the graduations when I smiled through disappointment, the countless nights I had swallowed my voice to keep the peace. All of it had built to this night, this collapse. Then the whispers began, small at first, cautious, like someone testing the weight of a secret. Anna Lane leaned into Uncle Donald, murmuring, "She was right all along." Across the table, one of the cousins shifted, glancing nervously at Dad before muttering, "We never knew, we never saw." The words spread like cracks through glass, quiet but unstoppable. Vanessa shot to her feet, the scrape of her chair against the floor startling in the heavy quiet. Her bracelet caught the light, a mocking sparkle against her flushed face. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "She's twisting everything. She doesn't deserve," her words broke off, strangled by the weight of the evidence already laid bare. She grabbed her coat from the back of her chair, storming toward the door. The glitter of her bracelet followed her out, the slam of the door echoing like a gavel closing judgment. Michael sat stiff, jaw clenched, his eyes darting between Dad and Mom as though searching for someone to take control. But neither of them spoke. Dad stared into his glass, knuckles white around the stem. Mom sat motionless, her earlier whisper, "What have we done?" still hanging in the air like a ghost. Slowly, relatives began to gather their things, their movements hushed, uneasy. No one wanted to be the first to speak openly, but the whispers had already slipped free. They would not stay contained within these walls. They never did. Suburban families like ours thrived on reputation, on keeping up appearances, and the cracks were spreading faster than anyone could patch them. I sank into my chair, the adrenaline finally loosening its grip. My hands trembled, but not from fear. Relief pulsed through me, mixed with exhaustion. Lucas slipped into the empty seat beside me, his presence solid and grounding. He draped an arm across my shoulders, his warmth pulling me back from the edge of trembling. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the fear that had haunted me for months. For a second, I let myself lean against him, let myself breathe. The weight wasn't gone, not yet, but it was lighter, shared, around us. Relatives shuffled out into the cold night, murmuring to each other as they pulled on coats and scarves. The words would travel with them from house to house, neighbor to neighbor. Tomorrow, whispers would turn into gossip, gossip into stories, and soon everyone in town would know. For once, the truth wouldn't be buried. It would live, breathing beyond these walls, carried by the same voices that had once laughed at my candle. The room emptied, leaving only the clatter of dishes and the faint hiss of candles burning low. Dad hadn't moved. Mom still sat frozen. Michael's chair stood empty, pushed back in defeat. The house felt different, no longer untouchable, no longer perfect. I reached for my phone, needing the solid feel of it in my hand. The screen lit up instantly, buzzing across the table. The name on the display made my breath hitch. Raymond Clark, again. The lawyer's call sliced into the silence. Insistent, impossible to ignore. The whispers might have begun tonight, but something told me this call would decide where they would lead. A week later, I returned to the house with different eyes. The driveway was quiet, no cars lined up, no chatter of relatives spilling through the door. The air felt colder, sharper, as though the house itself had aged in just a few days. I pushed open the front door and stepped inside. The living room still carried traces of Christmas. The tall tree stood in the corner, its branches drooping slightly, lights glowing faintly in the early dusk. Ornaments swayed with the draft from the sparkle dimmer now, like the house had lost its appetite for display. For years, this room had been a stage where favoritism played out like theater. Now it felt hollow, the set left standing after the actors had already walked away. Lucas followed me in, his footsteps soft behind mine. He didn't say anything, just watched as I walked slowly to the center of the room. I let my eyes travel across the space. The couch where Vanessa had laughed, the chair where Dad had toasted Michael, the table where Mom had polished her pride. All of it felt different now, smaller. I set my bag down gently and drew a deep breath. My chest rose and fell, steady, not with anger, not with grief, but with a quiet certainty. I no longer needed their approval. The will had confirmed my place, the evidence had shattered their perfect mask. But what mattered more was this moment, knowing I was free from the weight of needing them to see me. From my bag, I pulled out the candle, the same vanilla-scented one that had once burned humiliation into my memory. Its wick was still untouched, wax smooth as glass. I placed it on the table where the bank statement had landed just a week ago. This time I smiled. Lucas tilted his head, curious, but didn't interrupt. He understood in his own way that this wasn't about the candle. It was about reclaiming the meaning behind it. I ran my fingers across the glass jar, tracing the cheap sticker that still clung to the bottom. Once it had symbolized how little they thought of me, how easily I could be dismissed. Now, in the silence of the living room, it meant something else entirely. Survival, resilience, proof that even the smallest flame could outlast the showiest diamond. I picked up a match from the mantel, struck it against the box. The flame flared bright, small but fierce, dancing in the stillness. I held it above the wick, pausing long enough to let the moment breathe. "I own this now," I whispered, my voice steady. The flame touched the wick and the candle bloomed to life. Soft light spilled across the table, warm and steady, not mocking, not dismissive. "Mine." Lucas stepped closer, his hand brushing my shoulder. I didn't need his words, the glow reflected in his eyes was enough. I leaned toward the candle, letting the warmth brush my face. This time, I whispered to the quiet room, "It's mine." The wax began to melt, slow and deliberate, the flame standing tall. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't meant to dazzle. But it was real, steady, and mine to keep. And for the first time in years, that was more than enough. The Christmas tree in the corner still glowed faintly, its light softer now, the room quieter than I had ever known it. I set the candle on the table, watching the flame hold steady, no longer a reminder of humiliation, but of the boundary I had finally drawn. Fairness in family isn't given, it has to be claimed, and respect is the only love that lasts. Parents who play favorites forget that children grow into adults who demand truth. Justice may arrive late, but when it comes, it restores more than balance, it restores dignity. The house no longer felt like a prison. It was just four walls, and I finally belonged to myself. If the story touches you, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Type 1 if you sympathize, type 2 if you see room for improvement.